At the start of the movie, we meet a young Mandela.
I dream the same dream.
Born into a middle-class Xhosa family and initiated into manhood through traditional ceremonies.
Allah had given me the name Holy Slasla.
After studying law, he became a barrister in Johannesburg in 1942, defending innocent Africans unfairly prosecuted in an apartheid society.
Let's say cutting 15 minutes. Let's give 15 minutes.
Mr. Mandela, sir, you promised us. Yes. Yeah, but the people are losing hope in their land.
In one case, he freed a black woman accused of stealing oversized panties from her white employer by proving they couldn't belong to the woman's madam.
Mrs. de Kock, how do we know that these items are not my client's herself? What I'm saying is, can you identify these items as yours?
Mandela's sharp skills made him a trusted defender of his people. One day, Walter Sisulu, a member of the African National Congress, ANC, approached Mandela to recruit him.
You don't come to Congress meetings.
Why would I want to do that?
Mandela dismissed him, joking he wouldn't follow strangers. But Walter challenged him by asking if he liked being called a boy by the Boers.
Do you like it when the boys are calling you boy?
Walter remained interested in Mandela's leadership potential.
You're right. We need him.
That evening, Mandela went drinking and dancing with a friend.
It says you can only have relations with members of your own race.
Am I a member of your own race?
After leaving the bar, his friend, walking home drunk, was stopped by police for not carrying a pass.
Where's your pass, eh?
I left it at home, boss.
No.
On top of his drunkenness, the officers felt like imprisoning him. Shortly, they dragged him away to their vehicles. Upon arriving, before he could be placed in a cell, he fell, and the authorities brutally beat him on the ground, calling him nasty names. Their hatred and brutality led to his death that night. The next day, it was falsely reported that he had died of congenital syphilis.
Death, congenital syphilis. Everything is in order here.
Mandela was furious because he knew the truth. His friend had been beaten to death. Medical affidavits confirmed it, but the court refused to admit the case, claiming that the police couldn't be lying and Mandela should show respect for the law.
I suggest that you start showing some respect to the law, boy. Now, I have work to do. Good day to you.
That night, Mandela attended an ANC meeting at Walter's house.
Who did Jackson ever hurt? I mean, what did he do to deserve what they did to him?
Still angry, he spoke about his desire to change the system and how people needed education, hard work, and pride to improve their situation.
Education, hard work, pride.
At Walter's house, Mandela noticed a girl named Evelyn Mace and was captivated by her for the rest of the evening.
And what about you? What do you like to do?
Over the next few days, he took her out on dates and they eventually married. Over time, Mandela developed a strong desire to rescue his people from the oppressive laws. Evelyn noticed this and encouraged him to enter politics to take the fight to the next level.
Leave some things to God.
Does your God want her children to go hungry?
One day, Walter demonstrated the power of collective action by organizing a mass protest against the government decision to raise bus fares.
Don't pay! Let their buses run empty! If we stand together, we can beat them!
Mandela, inspired by the unity of the people, joined the protest, leaving Evelyn on the road by herself because he felt he had to be part of the movement.
It's going to be trouble. I want to go home.
They're not breaking any laws, but I must go with them.
Nelson!
In 1948, the government officially imposed segregation between whites and Native Africans. Walter and Mandela continued holding meetings, successfully gaining more followers. Mandela became a symbol of hope for the people.
They are having a party and we are not invited. So let's defy their unjust laws.
However, he soon developed a reputation as a womanizer. having multiple affairs with women he found attractive. When Evelyn confronted him about his infidelity, he responded with violence.
You will burn in hell!
Shut your mouth! Shut your mouth!
Their son witnessed this and was calmly sent to bed. The next day, in response to the segregation laws, Mandela organized mass demonstrations with the ANC.
Let them drive! We say over our dead bodies!
He even broke the laws himself by entering whites-only areas, leading to his arrest.
What do you think you're doing here? See, lady, no manners at all.
After spending a few days in jail, he returned home to find his house empty of furniture. Evelyn had abandoned him, taking their children with her. Mandela later found his son hiding in one of the bedrooms, having come back without his mother's knowledge.
Are you here alone?
Yes.
Overcome with disappointment in himself, Mandela took his son to the rural village where he had grown up. His mother, seeing him from a distance, welcomed him warmly, but scolded him for his reckless actions. Asking why he was always in trouble with the law and why his wife had left him. Mandela couldn't justify his actions and stood in silence. Back in the township, Mandela met Winnie, a social worker, during his work with the ANC.
What time do you finish?
6.
I'll be here.
After a brief romance, Mandela married Winnie in a traditional ceremony, believing she would understand his passion and dedication to the cause. By 1960, the segregation laws had grown stricter, requiring Native Africans to carry ID cards at all times. During a protest outside a police station, the station commander opened fire on the unarmed crowd, killing more than 100 people. The scene was filled with corpses, and reporters captured horrific images of the massacre. In response, Mandela and others burned their passes, signaling that there would be no turning back.
The authority of a state that makes
Mandela began organizing an armed brigade within the ANC, rallying people with speeches about the need for action.
Spear of the nation. We are the people of this nation.
The government intensified its hunt for Mandela, frequently harassing Winnie for his whereabouts.
You need a new man to keep you warm at night, won't you?
Despite this, Mandela went underground, continuing his work from the ANC safe house at Lily's Leaf Farm, where he learned bomb making.
When the acid reaches the mixture, it catalyzes, and you've got bomb.
Soon, the ANC began bombing empty government offices. The next day, Mandela was labeled a terrorist in the newspapers, but he remained undeterred. He managed to contact a foreign reporter for a secure interview, where he expressed his hopes for freedom and his love for his family.
If the government doesn't give in to the concessions that you want, will there be violence?
There is violence now.
One night, an ANC operation went wrong when a detonator exploded prematurely, killing one of the members. Mandela reacted with disappointment upon hearing the news. Shortly after, he noticed 2 cars closely following him while he was driving. At the same time, Walter and other ANC members were arrested during a raid on their safe house. Also, the authorities eventually apprehended Mandela on the road. Right now, Mandela had no choice but to give himself up to the authorities that bombarded him finally. Meanwhile, a young boy ran through the village to inform Winnie of Mandela's arrest, bringing devastating news to her.
Mama Winnie! Mama Winnie! They caught him.
The government is responding and arresting all high command of the ANC, including Mandela, and putting them on trial.
Amandla!
The case of the state is against the National High Command of Umkhonto we Sizwe, the military wing of the African National Congress. The state contends that the accused are responsible for acts of sabotage aimed at facilitating a violent resolution and an armed invasion of this country with the intention of overthrowing the government.
The state contends that the accused are responsible for acts of sabotage aimed at facilitating violent...
After hearing the plea, Mandela was asked if he pleads guilty or not guilty, to which he replied that it should have been the government rather than himself placed in the dock. He did not plead guilty.
That should be put in the dock. I plead not guilty.
Soon, Mandela was given a chance to deliver his final plea, and he calmly told the court that he doesn't have any love for violence, but if necessary, he is prepared to die for the freedom of his people.
If needs be, it is an ideal for which I am prepared to die.
His speech was heartfelt, and he didn't hesitate to stand firm in his beliefs. Shortly after, the entire ANC High Command was sentenced to life imprisonment, including Mandela, who had been expecting the penalty to be death.
I have therefore decided not to impose the supreme penalty. The sentence, in the case of all the accused, will be life imprisonment.
He was relieved it wasn't death, and he turned back to hold the hands of his wife in the courtroom. His mother was also there, old and gray, and he tearfully bid them goodbye for his life imprisonment. Soon, Mandela and the rest of the ANC were transferred to Robben Island in 1964 to serve their sentences. When they arrived, it was clear that the major warden would not tolerate any form of resistance, as they had done in Johannesburg. He made it clear to them that this was an island where they had no rights, and he intended to make them wish they had been hanged if they dared to challenge him.
You will die here. If you have any complaints, well, that's just too bad, because nobody on the island gives a shit.
Once inside the prison, they were given shorts and assigned cells. While Mandela stood in line, he observed how rude and racist the officers were to the prisoners. The lifetime imprisonment hadn't truly begun, but it was already apparent that it would be hell. When Mandela saw his cell, he noted how dirty and unkempt it was. But he had no choice but to comply in this foreign land dominated by whites.
This is it, boy. Home. For the rest of your life.
Over time, however, Mandela began to accept his fate and work on his own self-improvement. He started working out regularly and tirelessly until he was steady enough to continue. He worked hard while also encouraging Walter and the others to keep their spirits up.
We have to make them respect us. And they will, but it will take time.
Later that day, the prisoners were sent outside for labor, digging hard rocks in conditions that resembled slavery, where whites made blacks their servants without a justified reason. Mandela, Walter, and the others remained firm and strong, completing their tasks without conflict. However, this wasn't always the case. One day, an officer teased Mandela about Winnie, who was now without her husband. Mandela tried to fight the officer, but Walter calmed him down, telling him never to lose his temper like that again.
Every time they make us angry, it's like they win. Never let them see you lose your temper, Madi.
Mandela was denied mail from his family, and the guards mentally tortured him. Meanwhile, outside, the government made it a point to harass Mandela's family. Winnie faced repeated interruptions from the police, who barged into her house looking for evidence of her involvement in resisting the current ruling party. One day, Mandela was handed a piece of newspaper that stated Winnie had been arrested for questioning. He felt responsible for all her troubles. He was deeply saddened, but could do nothing about it. When it was time for prisoners to receive mail, Mandela discovered that his letters had been trimmed and destroyed, deliberately preventing him from reading them. The warden did it on purpose, leaving Mandela in somber silence. At night, Mandela reminisced in flashbacks about the time he spent with Winnie and his son, and how deeply he loved them. In the middle of the night, however, the wardens burst in unannounced, driving everyone outside into the rain. They made the prisoners strip naked and stand in the rain. Mandela knew this was completely unacceptable and mentioned that he could report it to their superiors, and they had no right to treat them this way.
You tell your commanding officer, I will be complaining to the head of the prison service in Pretoria.
The next day, the head of Pretoria prison visited Mandela's cell and asked if he had anything to say. Mandela told him the place was out of control, and the wardens were nothing more than drunken hooligans.
This prison is out of control, and those prison guards are nothing but some drunk hooligans.
The colonel replied that he owned 5 farms, had money, and did whatever he wished. As for the wardens, they were simply doing their job. Before leaving, Mandela requested long trousers, as all the prisoners had been forced to wear shorts since their arrival. The colonel left smiling.
He wants long trousers.
Later, Mandela was called off duty because someone had come to visit. It was Winnie. He was cautioned by the warden to speak only about family matters. Sitting down, he asked Winnie how she bore the arrests and the pressure. She replied,
"It's nothing I can't deal with. They like to have little chats with me."
She told him that the arrests were usually timed for when their children returned from school, so that the kids would come home to an empty house. She also mentioned that children were only allowed to visit their fathers when they turned 16. However, since their children were only 5 and less years old, it would take a long, uncertain time before they could visit. She also shared that his mother, Madiba, was sick and that people are saying she might die soon.
Your mother, Madiba, she is sick. They say she will die soon.
The news was deeply troubling. But before Mandela could gaze at her for long, the warden closed the window between them, telling Mandela that time was up. Sadly, he returned to his cell. As for Winnie, things got worse after that. In 1969, Winnie was arrested, removed from her 2 daughters, and kept in solitary confinement. The arrest didn't even happen at an official hour. They came at night to take her away from her children. Her time in confinement was extremely difficult, and she almost went insane. Time went by, and still the couple remained in their cells without any form of justice coming to them. Their children were left abandoned in their home and had to take care of themselves. The older child took on the responsibility of feeding and sustaining the household, while Mandela tried to write them letters. However, only 2 letters per year were allowed, and in fact, they weren't even receiving those.
The only means of passing my love to you.
As for Winnie, she was constantly, almost daily harassed and denied basic rights. Simple things such as going to the toilet or having a decent day in her cell without physical assault were out of reach for her. One ordinary day on the island, Mandela came across the colonel once again and spoke to him. At first, Mandela was polite, but then he asked why the colonel remained in his job when he didn't need it, considering his family owned 5 farms. The colonel didn't respond.
Who told you that?
You did.
Later that day, after all the prisoners were gathered in their cells, long trousers were distributed as a form of reward. Everyone was happy to finally replace their shorts, and it was all because of Mandela.
Can you believe it?
Kathy, you are no longer the daddy.
That same day, while the prisoners were working as usual, Mandela was handed a telegram by one of the wardens. He read it, and it stated that his firstborn son had died in a sudden and tragic motorbike accident. Mandela's heart broke and he cried on the spot, devastated that he had failed his family. Soon after, he approached the offices and asked for permission to bury his son, as it was his responsibility as a father. However, it was made clear that exceptions were not allowed, especially for prisoners convicted of terrorist acts. Later, Walter visited Mandela in his cell to express his condolences. Mandela, however, was heartbroken, saying that he was slowly losing everyone: his mother, his son, and his wife. After 16 months of confinement, Winnie was released from prison in 1970. She looked pale and cold as she returned to her neighborhood, where people gathered to cheer her name. Thankfully, she found her 2 daughters safe and older, and she embraced them. When reporters asked if she had anything to say, she responded with a genuine thank you to her jailers and the government.
Thank you. And I say to the government, thank you.
In June 1976, more riots broke out all over the country, protesting the apartheid policy, as hundreds were arrested and put into jails. A new batch of inmates at Robben Island informed Mandela about the uprising in the rest of the country, and he tells them together they are still hopeful and stronger.
I can see that you are very brave. And you. And you. But alone, what can you do?
Mandela has now grown so much and is almost an old man. Now, more time has passed. His daughter came to visit. She still keeps up with updates in the children's lives, and his daughter told him she supports him even though she hasn't grown up with him.
You have your mother's spirit.
Tata, I want you to know I've always loved you.
Soon, a massive protest was launched in 1981 to free Mandela and South Africa.
Nelson, you will not be able to stay home, brother. You will not be able to.
In 1982, after 18 years on Robben Island, the government reacted and shifted Mandela to Cape Town prison from Robben Island. Their new cells are not as shitty as the previous. Rather, it's a penthouse with a huge mirror inside the room. However, Mandela seems to notice the mirror isn't actually a mirror. Rather, a two-way mirror where the wardens are looking from behind, listening to every word the prisoners are chatting from. As for Winnie, she is now an older woman and more mature with her decisions. She is continuing her husband's legacy by leading a community of protesters. Her children see her march a crowd and somehow they look worried. But she doesn't look any weaker this time and motivates the crowd by telling them even though they don't acquire an AK-47, they surely have some petrol and a pair of matches to burn the town down.
We have no AK-47s. We have no Casbahs. But we have our hands.
Also, there were some rats between them who reported the meeting to the white supremacist officers, and Winnie made sure to address them as well. She said they will find them down and revenge to get justice. Next thing you know, the community is gathered in a group, some to kill the rats by beating them to death on the ground, while some burn them down alive by pouring gas on them and lighting up the fire.
Officials were torn apart by the mobs before the bodies were set alight.
Explosions, gunshots, and screams are everywhere on one road, and the town is in complete chaos and disorder. Shortly, the white president of South Africa makes an offer to release Mandela if he agrees to shun violence. Mandela didn't respond so quickly. That gave him the opportunity to get a visit from his wife. This time, the couple are allowed to have physical touch in the room, and Mandela is excited. He gets there and holds her hands, to which Winnie quickly responds with seriousness. She whispered in his ears that he must be careful of this offer of release. He mustn't betray his people fighting on the streets. But before she could say further, the warden told her not to speak of politics and not to speak in a whispering mode.
Speak so I can hear you.
Our people have never lost hope. The more they oppress us, the harder we fight.
But Winnie spoke louder and clearer that the people have never lost hope. And the more they oppress them, the harder they fight. She feared nothing, and she looked more determined than Mandela himself. Finally, Mandela handed her his response message that was to be presented to the president. In February 1985, a group of natives gathered to hear the final decision of Mandela and how things will be from now on. Mandela's older daughter got up on the stage and presented her presence to tell Mandela's message. He said, "I am not a violent man, and it was only when all other forms of resistance were no longer open to us that we turned to armed struggle," he said.
Let him dismantle apartheid. I cannot and will not give any undertaking at a time when I and you, the people, are not free.
Meaning he refused the offer, saying that the government has to abandon apartheid and the oppression of Native Africans for the violence to stop. The people cheer and celebrate his decision while Winnie stands backstage proud of her daughter. Soon enough, the South African government starts secret negotiations with Mandela to agree to some sort of settlement to stabilize South Africa. Mandela's other ANC colleagues oppose these secret negotiations with Mandela alone, and they want to be made part of it, but Mandela goes ahead nonetheless.
None of us are bigger than the movement.
But I will do what I believe is right.
He was moved from Cape Town prison into house arrest on his 70th birthday. His family is allowed to visit. Mandela has turned moderate in his views and understands that the white minority fears revenge if they devolve power to the Native Africans. Mandela wants to assure them of no revenge, but Winnie doesn't support him, as she has seen too much Native African blood flowing down the streets through the years. Mandela was finally released from custody on 11 February 1990 and went back home to Johannesburg. The newly elected South African president has been asked by the British monarchy to find a way to end the violence. The whites propose a power-sharing formula which Mandela wants to accept, but the ANC and Winnie herself are bitterly opposed to it.
How do we accept power sharing with the whites? And what do? We fight? Correct. We start the war.
Winnie vows to fight for the people, and this caused strong tension between Mandela and her. Anyway, the two have been apart for so long, so the reason behind their difference in their beliefs of what's good for the people stems from the distance between their hearts.
Do you realize there's a war out there? The people are angry.
Throughout the years, Winnie has changed and has been cold to him since he arrived. It may have to do with the torture and loneliness, but she is emotionally unavailable to him. While they converse this day, Mandela confronts Winnie to stop the violence, but she refuses.
Am I to blame because I don't want to be alone?
Soon, proof emerges of her affairs, and Mandela is forced to separate from her.
We have mutually agreed that a separation would be best for each of us.
To which she responds with utter sadness in her lonely bedroom. For the next day, however, things got uglier, and the roads of Johannesburg were filled with violence once again. With a greater brutality and mercilessness, the people fought each other whom they thought was their enemy. It almost resembles civil war.
Cutting down anyone they saw.
After many more riots, Mandela goes on national TV and pleads for peace. He tells his people to vote instead of fight. The government has stolen 27 years of his life, and he has forgiven them. And he remarks they should too.
I have forgiven them. If I can forgive them, then you can forgive them.
He is their leader, and he should be the one to tell them you're wrong when they are wrong. And he is now telling them fighting or war is wrong, and only steps that can be taken forward are only through peace.
Be peaceful, and when election day comes, vote.
After his serious speech on TV on the 27th February 1994, in the first open elections in South Africa, ANC was voted to power. Mandela walks in contentment between the white officers, this time with much respect and genuine cheer from his people. The film concludes as we see Mandela in his old age, where he walks on his homeland, telling us that no one is born hating another person. People learn to hate, and they can be taught to love instead, for love comes more naturally.
They can be taught to love, for love comes more naturally to the human.
Don't forget to subscribe and put likes. Only here you will find the best recaps of good movies. See you soon.